have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am that Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. We're sort of in the middle of that time frame I was talking about, or maybe even the earlier parts of that time frame I was talking about, where the number of shows that happens is going to suffer for a little while. The last week was a really good, yet another example of that. Hopefully it'll crank back up. And I know I talked about some of the underpinning reasons behind it in terms of being able to move the show into sort of a space where it's self-sustaining financially, and I'm able to generate more content. And I'm sort of coming up with a new timeline to achieve those goals. I don't want to let missing, because we've hit numbers ever since I started, and this is thanks to you. I have no one to thank but you guys for the success of the show since I converted it over to the new format, since the Monday through Friday format. Ridiculous growth in the first quarter. In fact, the first year was amazing. I hit every goal every single quarter and exceeded them. After the first year, had really exceeded all the goals. And I want to own the process of making the show desirable and able to continue to grow. So I'm gonna come up with a plan and push forward with that. But this is sort of a crossing over of a lot of different things. For those of you who've been listening for a while, you know that I've got a lot of stuff going on in my personal real estate world, as well as doing the show and as well as being a real estate broker, and all that other wonderful stuff. And again, this week has been a perfect example of that in getting my property ready for sale. I'm at the point now where I've decided to own just a lot of the things that needed to happen to the house. I have some just for those of you who aren't familiar with the backstory on all of this, I have a family member who's a contractor, and the plan was for him to do the vast majority, 90% of everything that it needed to do that was on my list in order to get the house ready to sell. And delays happened. We've talked about them on the show. I'm not going to go into them in detail now, but long story short, huge delays added up to something like the original goal, with tons of elbow room in terms of time built into the plan, was to be on the market in at least June, no later than July. So we're a few months behind. We're definitely behind. My new plan was going to be to cut short an awful lot of things and go on the market, because I continue to think that we're going to see a downturn in the marketplace over the next year. I think it'd be a great idea to be liquid if you live in Silicon Valley and invest in other areas. Interesting article actually came out today relating to that. We might chat about that a little bit. So the plan is moving forward, and what I've done is owned the solving of these problems for myself. So the last week was another example of just a really long list of things I've been working on. I think I mentioned at the front end. I don't think I went over my entire list, but a few of the items were replacing a back door that was in very bad shape. So I had to re-stain that and do all the work on that one. And it's amazing how things that you wouldn't expect to cost piles of money. I wanted to have a consistent setup in the house in terms of doors, so I went with the same style of door, which was a solid wood door. Whole long story behind that. Again, that's going to be part of the lessons learned show come December when we look back on 2017. But I've been replacing light fixtures. I've been painting and touching up, all kinds of stuff. And of course, while all this is going on, I still have two sons left. One of my sons moved off to college last month. I still have two more who are bound and determined to screw up the work that I did 2 months ago. I already did a lot of painting touch up and discovered the kids somehow managed to rub themselves up against every surface between the front door and their bedroom door. So sadly, there's some stuff that has to get done over again. But anyway, that's what it's been filled with. I still have a very long list of things to do. And that's kind of what every spare minute has been taken up with. Now I find that the best time for me to do the show is when I'm exhausted, when my back hurts, when my legs hurt, when my arms hurt from being in all these bizarre positions and having to do painting or installing new things or whatever. So here I am. It is, as I record this show, it is Wednesday afternoon. After a weekend, and of course, there's doing things with the kids, right? As I've mentioned before, so much about getting what you want out of life is recognizing what's super important. I have less than 1 year left before my last two sons, they happen to be twins, will be moving out for college. And as I did with my other son who moved out last month, I want to just suck the marrow from the bones of this last year with my sons still living in the house. So I took them camping. And for those of you who are familiar with what's going on in California, giant wildfires. So we went Saturday and did a wilderness survival course, which I thought was kind of fun. And the kids made their own, improvised shelters, learned how to make fire by rubbing sticks together or really just using a bow and making fire that way. A bunch of other things, dealing with water issues, all kinds of stuff. So it was very fun. But we managed to dodge it in terms of the fire starting. The fires started, I guess, late Sunday, early Monday. We were back home by Monday afternoon, so everything was fine there. And I'm sure that's the reason why you've tuned in. You want to know what the Rebel Broker was up to over the weekend. The point being, spent the quality time with the family that I consider to be valuable, and the rest of the time since has been spent working on these other things. So yes, definitely a full schedule. I still have a rather long list of little things, staining, touch-ups, putting new coats on things. And as you remember, one of the things that I think is important when you're marketing your home is to never have anything that someone walks out of a room thinking, well, that was horrible. It doesn't mean everything has to be totally updated. For instance, I've mentioned before that the one thing I really would have liked to have done, the one thing that was on the list, it was actually in the top 5 things I wanted to do to the house, along with remodeling the kitchen, which is done, which is a whole other story in and of itself. The master bath absolutely needs a redo. And after doing the tiling in the kitchen myself, I actually feel like I could do the kitchen, but the amount of time, or the bathroom, but the amount of time that it would take to do it makes me have to think about the trade-off and maybe focus on the most annoying things in that master bathroom and just dealing with those and not doing some of that in-depth work that would take me months, because I'd really like to be on the market before the end of the year. And even before Thanksgiving. I mean, I'd love to be on the market this month, be in escrow. And here's another motivation to do that. I have found another lot. Now, I have one of the lessons learned from 2017 is going to relate specifically to a lot I found earlier in the year. I found another lot last week that would absolutely fit my needs. It would be absolutely 100% perfect, right? And we'll talk about how that is going to evolve. I'm going to be making an offer on it. But the problem is the lot's is overpriced substantially. I'm not real sure where they got their number. It doesn't really make much sense given other sales of lots over the last couple of years. Even if you're the most generous inflation guy in terms of assigning higher values to undeveloped lots, it just doesn't make sense. So we can talk about that and see where it goes. But I'd love to get the ball rolling on all of this stuff as soon as possible. So that's kind of an overview of what's going on with me personally. And I had a few of you reach out to me in terms of asking, well, hey, it sounds like you're sort of setting the stage to close the doors on the show. That is absolutely not my intent. Worst case scenario is it moves forward like this, where once I've moved and everything in my life is settled, for whatever reason, at some point, if I ultimately just don't reach the goal, if I give it everything I've got and it doesn't go where I'm hoping it will go, maybe it becomes a 2-day-a-week show, a 3-day-a-week show, with one of those days being an interview day. I'm not sure. I enjoy doing this show. I know I'm helping at least some amount of folks out there with the information I'm providing. So that feels good. I like that. I like that folks, I get emails from folks who say, hey, thanks for talking about this. absolutely helped me dodge a bullet with something I was doing, or thanks for giving me this perspective on something I invested in. It's gone really well. So, that's really what the point is. My point is to leave more value there at the end of each show than either you expected or than you invested in your own time. So, and I know I'm achieving that for some folks. For those of you who are listening and feeling like your time's being wasted, I apologize. I hope at some point we can come to a point where you feel like you're getting more than you're putting in. So be patient. Hopefully we'll get there. All right. So there is that. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I alluded to it a few minutes ago, interesting article from CNBC where the headline is "Rent in San Francisco, but buy in Detroit." We've talked about this tons. Looking at all of the various pointers in terms of data that suggest where you're going to make the most money, where you're going to make the least amount of money. San Francisco is at the bottom of the heap in terms of amount of money you're going to make. Your $1 million will work much harder for you elsewhere than in San Francisco. And this is an article that came out that was referencing a Trulia article stating that you're better off renting with a roommate. And of course, there's that, right? If you're going to do the roommate thing. But if you're a married couple, that's almost the same thing, right? You've got a roommate that you're married to who is probably also earning an income and contributing to the household expenses. You're better off renting with a roommate than buying your first home alone in cities such as San Jose and San Francisco, according to online real estate site Trulia. Sacramento and Ventura County, California, and Austin, Texas are other metro areas where renting with others outweighs buying. Detroit sees the greatest savings from buying. Purchasing a starter home in West Palm Beach, Florida is also a bargain over renting with a roommate. So, and where does this come from? I mean, this is stuff we've talked about for a long time because it derives from the same sort of data that we talk about frequently to help you guide your investment decisions so that you're getting the biggest bang for the buck. What's also interesting is we had a guest talk to us about Detroit. If you go back and check out the show on September 15th, we did an interview with Albion, Detroit real estate investor. I'll go ahead and include a link to Al's interview in the show notes for today's show if you'd like to go and check that out. But absolutely lays out and discusses in pretty good detail the compelling case for potentially investing in Detroit. Now, as always, my same advice applies, that getting that ground truth going on is absolutely the key to success in a very challenging market like Detroit, where you really need to make sure that you're buying in the right areas. But, he made a really good point. If you go there and get the ground truth, if you drive around, typically you can spot these areas. The areas that are going to give you the creeps are going to be the ones that you're going to want to stay away from. And in terms of just return on investment, remember, Detroit was what? Wasn't it in our top 5 in terms of rate of return? That's pretty impressive. So just take that with the other things we've talked about. You don't necessarily need to focus on Detroit. We talked about several others. We talked about Cleveland with a return on investment of 10.5 or a capitalization rate of what was it, 10.5? That's pretty impressive as well. So take that stuff you'd have to buy for $1 million out in places like San Francisco and San Jose and buy yourself 10 to 15 properties in these other areas and make yourself way more money each and every month and be diversified so that when you have someone who is moving out, you're not losing 100% of your monthly rental income. You're losing 1/10 or 1/15 of that amount. Okay. And again, I'll include a link to this story in the show notes for today's show if you'd like to check it out for yourself. Now, one other thing that's probably good to point out is when conducting their analysis, Trulia assumed buyers would be taking on a 30-year fixed-rate loan, put a 20% down payment, and stay in the same place for 7 years. Why is all that good in terms of assumptions? Well, because statistically it bears scrutiny, right? Typically that number's actually gotten longer. People are tending to stay in their homes longer. But 3 to 7 years is the range in the good old days that you used to get with people between when they buy and when they'd move. So their calculations are based on reasonable data. And a 30-year fixed rate loan makes total sense. Rates are ridiculously low, and 20% down is typical for a conforming loan. Their calculations used median rent and median starter home prices. Renting with a roommate is overwhelmingly the better option over buying a starter home in the nation's 2 most expensive markets in San Francisco. The savings from renting compared to buying is 16.5%. That's absolutely true. It's also true in my marketplace. Let me hit you with some data here. Now, granted, I live in in what would probably be referred to as an upscale, or not probably. It is an upscale neighborhood in Morgan Hill. It wasn't quite upscale when I moved here, but it is absolutely now. So we've benefited from that. Typically, homes in here go for $1 million plus at least, and $1 million will buy you a home that needs some work. Typically, homes are selling for $1.2 to $1.4 million in here. And if I were to sell this home and I were to rent a home of almost the same size, maybe 400, 500 square feet smaller, one less bedroom, I would actually be paying less per month in rent than I currently pay if you add up mortgage, insurance, and taxes. So granted, I mean, it's not an identical home. I'm not getting the exact same home. That exact same home would probably cost me $4,000 a month, which would absolutely, in other words, I could rent my house currently with what I owe and have positive cash flow on it. But my goal here, for those of you who are new to the show, and the reason why I want to sell is I want to go ahead and sell this property and then opt out of the market for a little while. Take some funds and invest it in other markets, maybe Detroit. Doubt it. Detroit is just not something that draws me personally. The numbers don't indicate I shouldn't go there. They do indicate I should, but not probably where I'm going to go. But I'll take some of those funds and I'll invest it in properties in other parts of the country or other markets aside from the ones I'm currently in. And because I've kind of decided to put my money where my mouth is, I'm going to wait for the market to turn here, and then I might just go ahead and put some money into investing here in the Bay Area. So that's a ride I want to take with all of you. So hopefully that's something we can do together. All right. So with that taken care of, and let me suggest also to take a look at this particular article. It actually breaks down a lot of metro areas with the most savings from buying a home, and Detroit's right at the top. West Palm Beach is next, Knoxville, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, Philadelphia, Birmingham, Alabama, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Columbia, South Carolina, Kansas City, Missouri, and Toledo, Ohio. So there's more there. You're going to want to take a look at this just like we do with all the data we review to see what might fit in with strategies you've been considering. And wouldn't it be great if you happen to be near one of these areas that represents a really good option in terms of buying rather than renting, which may represent a really good advantage to you as far as acquisition costs being lower, which gives you a little bit more leverage to be able to move into that marketplace without committing a whole lot of funds. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to cover an interesting subject that a listener suggested. We'll see where we can go with it. I don't have a whole lot of data. It's really going to be just sort of a chat about this subject. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We've been chatting a little bit about more information that really points to folks staying away from what are usually considered the sexiest real estate markets, places like San Francisco and San Jose, where I happen to be based. It's something we've been saying on this show for a very long time. I think it's been over a year now that we've been suggesting you move your investment dollars elsewhere, which is very counterproductive to me making money here in real estate as a real estate guy in terms of helping other people find investment properties. Good investments can be found, but odds are that you're not going to be able to do that except under very unusual circumstances. One exception being, not true so much in San Francisco, but down here, purchasing a lot and building. which is another thing I'm looking into. And as I mentioned at the headliner of the show, that I have found another lot, and I'm going to be pursuing that. It would be an amazing set of shows if that ends up going through, and walking you through the process with me of acquiring that lot, getting things built, and then moving forward with it. So we'll keep your fingers crossed. We'll see where that goes. So I had a listener reach out to me asking about, what about area? We've had so many natural disasters. We have this natural disaster in California. We have wildfires going nuts. We've had Houston. We've had all these horrible things occur that cause an awful lot of damage. And what did I think about keying off of those as an opportunity to invest in those areas? So I don't have any hands-on experience doing that. I don't have any clients who I have helped do that. Obviously, I would only help people in California because that's where I'm licensed. So, and there really haven't been any disasters down here that I need that would fit in with that. But I have talked to folks who have, for instance, the one I have the most experience with is New Orleans, and New Orleans I have a soft spot in my heart for New Orleans. I've been there a few times, and it's very weird. It's like Vegas with a heart. And I know that for those of you who live in Vegas and love it, apologies. Vegas just feels very much like a place where you need to be a little bit more pragmatic. You need to keep your eyes open and know what's going on. And New Orleans has its own hangups. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's one of those places where you're getting amazing music. You get great cuisine. The people there's just in general. And again, I get it. It's a huge metro area that has a wide variety of types of folks there. But there's also this kind of personality to the town that's just really kind of amazing. Maybe it has to do with the fact it gets so dang humid there. And I'm being a guy who's not a huge fan of humid places. You would think that New Orleans would not be on my top list, but I like it. And I'm also, one thing that draws me, I think, to New Orleans is the history of the place. It's got such a rich history. But all that aside, and the only other example from my past that I have shared with you was the earthquake of '89 here in the Bay Area. I was a real estate agent at the time that happened, and a bunch of agents I was with at the time. There were quite a few of us who were all within about a year to a year and a half of each other in terms of having just started. And a whole bunch of them banded together and ended up investing in properties in Los Gatos, where a lot of homes had sort of slipped off their foundation. So one day, homes were selling pretty robustly, fairly well. The market was down a little bit. Remember, that was the time frame of the savings and loan scandal. And they were selling for, let's round it to say $500,000. And suddenly, a day and a half later, they were on October 17th, 1989, at 5:04 p.m., they suddenly dropped from being worth $500,000 to being worth $390,000. And tons of people were like, I'm out. New arrivals to the Los Gatos area, to the Bay Area, who hadn't been through an earthquake before, or maybe only lived there for a couple of years, and saw their homes off their foundation, were like, we're done. We're leaving. We're selling it. And in that period of time, I think this team of folks put together enough deals, right? I think they bought, I want to say 4 or 5 homes. I don't remember exactly, to be honest with you. It's been a long time ago. But that was how they all started their investment careers. They invited me to come in with them on that. At the time, I was actually still in college. I was in graduate school. And I didn't join in. You know, what's really stupid is at the time, I actually had the funds. I had been taking what I'd been making from real estate and paying off my student loans, and managed to do it in relatively short time. But man, yeah, so it's one of those moments I look back and wonder why I didn't do it. But in any event, they took those homes, cost about $10,000 to get them back on their foundations, and everything was fine. And so they ended up having a lot of value backed up to that. I think one thing that always kind of smacked me as a little bit preoccupying was that a lot of this was simply based on the panic of the moment. You were profiting off of the panic, and I'm not sure that's a bad thing. You're taking someone who's decided they're done, and you're purchasing that property and you're making it well again so that new people can enjoy it. But particularly when we're talking about agents, there's that moment where when you approach someone to buy their home that's off of a foundation, where you have to wonder, where does the fiduciary responsibility not occur? Particularly since you'd wonder, did these people approach these agents to say, I want you to sell my house, and then they sold it, right? If that person came to you and said, I want you to sell my house, that feels like the moment at which maybe you owe them a fiduciary responsibility, and you might want to advise them that they could put the home back on its foundation for X amount of dollars. I don't know. That question always kind of ate at me after that, in terms of that particular question. However, big differences, though, when we talk about markets like New Orleans or Houston or Florida, where there's just an awful lot of damage. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen. So I think if I was interested in investing in some, and I think so the short answer is yes. I think I think that folks who want to make money in real estate, who want to invest, and who also want to help rejuvenate communities that have been devastated by a natural disaster can absolutely get involved with those areas and make money. And in fact, I think the odds are that you will. The things that I think you need to be educated on, the things that I think you need to get to know about is, what are the challenges? Because remember, one of the things we've talked about here is things relating to water are the biggest problem you'll face. Whenever there's water somewhere, we start having a conversation about mold, rot. Water is the absolute enemy. So when it gets places it's not supposed to be, like inside someone's house, the first order of business is to strip out all the drywall up to at least, I think what I heard was at least a foot above what the water level was, and count on every bit of wiring being replaced. And so there's so much work that needs to be done. It can be a huge undertaking. So you need to be aware of that. My question would be, how do you acquire these properties? There's going to be a lot of weird things involved. There's going to be insurance settlements involved. So there'll be folks who maybe will use that insurance to simply recover their property. It would seem to me that there's a window of opportunity between when the insurance company pays off and when the work would begin, that you would have a window of opportunity to approach homeowners and say, hey, listen, is there an opportunity here for me to purchase this property? And I'm not 100% sure how the insurance process works. I don't know if the insurance folks simply say, we will pay to a flat amount, here's a check, have a nice day. Or do they do a situation where they do it like a construction loan almost, where they will simply restore the home to its original state, and they simply pay the contractors as they go? My guess is it might be a mix of those things. I'd love to hear from people who have more hands-on experience. But those, given one of those two scenarios, it would absolutely give you an opportunity to get involved in the rebuilding effort and rejuvenate a community. Now, another element that I would be focused on would be not to go with areas, or not to focus on areas for your investment that are away from the centers of why people live in these areas. So in an example, in New Orleans, I would go for places that tend to be more proximal to the downtown, that tend to be areas that would be the first to thrive in a recovered New Orleans. Communities with longer histories. Newer communities may not bounce back. Newer communities may find folks simply not deciding to rebuild where that was. So again, it's going to be a challenge. Just like there's all kinds of natural disasters, right? You could even categorize what happened to Detroit as a disaster. It may not have been natural. It may have been a man-made disaster, but it was a disaster in terms of the effect it had on the city, with the auto industry backing out and the communities just sort of shriveling on the vine. Even then, back when that happened, when folks saw the auto industry having difficulties, and that disaster struck, I think by knowing the ground truth and looking at the landscape of Detroit, a lot of folks called it and understood the dynamics of what was going on in Detroit, and disinvested from areas that were likely to shrivel on the vine, and then reinvested in areas that were going to continue to thrive in those other areas of Detroit that we talked about on Al's interview a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so how would you begin? I think the way to begin is to start to understand through research what are the elements you need to worry about in terms of purchasing properties that have been through a disaster, depending on what the disaster was. In this case, water is the focus. In most of the ones, water is the focus. But you would also want to start doing some searching to find out, what are the methods to acquire these properties? And it may be different in each area. It depends on who the ultimate holder of that property is, whether or not the person who owns that property is going to want to rebuild. If you want to get the ball rolling, if you want to just find out more, if you're interested in doing this, I think there's a lot of different high-tech ways you could do it. You could start off with Craigslist and go in there and put in an advertisement. You could advertise on Facebook. Facebook has been, and I'll tell you, I've been using Facebook now for advertising, and the results are actually pretty impressive. But you could absolutely do a search based on folks in these areas that experience these problems, because the first place people went when they were trying to let folks know they were okay was go and do that through Facebook. So those folks will absolutely see your ads to try to find these places and see if you can't come up with a way for you to acquire a property after these folks have maybe gotten their insurance settlement. And at that point, it would depend on who owns it. Maybe at that point, since it's a loss, it would be owned by the insurance company. I think in a lot of these areas, you're going to find that that the end point for a lot of these homes is going to be auctions. So keep an eye on that as well. Get plugged in with how to participate in auctions in these various communities. Now, this was us just kind of having a chat. I don't have a lot of hands-on experience to offer for these specific situations that have come up over the last couple of months in these different communities. But I would also not suggest that you let these particular elements scare you off. If you are absolutely comfortable with the large task of rehabbing these properties, I mean, if you're good with redoing the electrical, redoing all the drywall, potentially replacing a lot of wood that may be damaged, that work, every bit of energy you spend doing that work is going to save you money, because up front, you'll be able to look at it and see what the task is and realize, in order for this to work, the most I could possibly pay for this home is $10,000, $15,000. And here's the thing. When faced with a difficult task, you find yourself in the minority in terms of folks who want to take the task on. So use that to your advantage. You can absolutely make that stuff pay for itself and just feed a more profitable bottom line once you get to the end of the process and you either want to rent that unit or you want to sell that unit. Okay. So I hope that's been helpful. Absolutely, I would consider it an enter at your own risk scenario. The things you would want to most be comfortable with are the rehabbing elements of it, and also understanding the ground truth of what communities are going to come back the strongest so that you're doing this stuff in those communities. All right, folks, thanks again for listening. I hope this has been some valuable information for you and get you thinking in new and exciting ways, potentially growing the options that you have in the wide world of real estate investment. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to y'all next time.